Son called me on a Tuesday afternoon and I could hear it in his voice before he even got the words out. That particular kind of panic that only a father recognizes. Not the panic of a man who's been hurt, but the panic of a man who's finally seeing something clearly for the first time and doesn't know what to do with that vision. "Dad," he said, "she's at your house." I was sitting on my sister's back porch in Savannah, Georgia, watching her neighbor's dog chase a squirrel it had no chance of catching. The ceiling fan overhead turned slow and lazy in the August heat. I set down my sweet tea. "Say that again." "Renata. She went to your house. I don't know how she got the code to the gate, but she's there. I'm tracking her location on the app. She shared it with me when we first got together, remember? Dad, she's been there for 40 minutes. I didn't say anything for a moment. I looked out at that yard, at the light coming through the Spanish moss, and I thought about the locked room at the back of my house. The one I told my son, Dayon, never to go into without me present. The one I told his wife absolutely nothing about. "Is she still there now?" I asked. "The pin hasn't moved." "All right," I said. "Don't call her. Don't text her. Don't go over there. You let her do exactly what she's doing." "Dad, what is she?" "Trust me, son. I need you to trust me right now." I hung up and sat there another minute. The dog had given up on the squirrel. The fan kept turning. I'd been waiting for something like this for nearly 2 years, and now that it was here, I felt something I hadn't expected to feel. Not anger, not even satisfaction, just a kind of quiet, like the air before a storm settles in. Let me tell you about my daughter-in-law. Theon met Renata at a charity gala 3 years ago. He was 41, recently divorced, and had that particular vulnerability of a man who mistakes loneliness for readiness. She was 34, beautiful in that precise, deliberate way that takes real effort. And she had a way of making every person she talked to feel like the only person in the room. I'd seen that quality before. Once in a used car salesman in Memphis, and once in a woman who took my colleague for $80,000 over the course of a year and a half. I didn't say any of that to Dion. I watched and I listened. They moved fast, engaged within 8 months. I bought a new suit and smiled in the photos and said all the right things at the rehearsal dinner. But 2 weeks before the wedding, I sat down with my attorney, a man I've known for 30 years, who has never steered me wrong, and I restructured everything. Not because I was certain, because I was cautious. There's a difference, and that difference has kept me standing while men who were certain have fallen. I'm 67 years old. I spent 31 years building a regional trucking company from a single flatbed and a prayer. I sold it 9 years ago for more money than I ever dreamed of, when I was a young man loading freight in the dark. I have a house in Atlanta, a condo in Charlotte I rent out, investments, and a retirement account that my accountant describes as healthy in a tone that means considerably more than that. I don't talk about money. Never have. My father taught me that. A quiet man from rural Alabama who worked at a paper mill and managed to put 3 kids through college without anyone outside the family knowing how he did it. He said, the less people know about what you have, the less they can plan around it. I've lived by that my whole life. Renata, I came to understand, planned around everything. She started with the small things. Comments about the house, how large it was for one person, how it must be lonely, how she and Dion would be happy to move in and keep me company. I declined warmly. Then it was questions. Casual questions that weren't casual at all. Did I rent or own the Charlotte place? Was the company fully sold or did I still have shares? What did a financial advisor actually do with someone's portfolio? She asked with a smile and wide eyes, and I answered just enough to be polite and never enough to be useful. But the room was different. About 6 months after they got married, she asked about it directly. We were having Sunday dinner. I cook every third Sunday. It's a tradition I started when Dion was small. And she'd excused herself to use the bathroom and come back with that look on her face. The look of someone who has found a door they weren't supposed to find. "What's in the room at the end of the hall?" she asked. Just like that, right over the sweet potatoes. "Storage," I said. "Can I see?" "No," I said. She laughed like I'd made a joke. Dion glanced at me and then at his plate. He knew better than to push on things, I said plainly. That was one of the things I'd always been proud of in my son. He understood that no was a complete sentence when it came from me. But Renata had a way of returning to things, not obviously. She'd let weeks pass and then circle back in a different direction, through a different door. She mentioned once to Dayon that she'd heard there were old family photos in there. She didn't know where she'd heard that, because I'd never said it. She mentioned to my sister-in-law that I kept important documents in a locked room. My sister-in-law told me puzzled, because she hadn't heard it from anyone either. Renata was building a story in other people's minds, piece by piece, so that when she finally moved, the ground would already be prepared. I had seen this before too. Not a specific version, but the architecture of it. 2 months before that Tuesday phone call, I drove back to Atlanta from Charlotte and stopped by the house unannounced. My own house on my own street, and found Renata's car in the driveway. Dion was at work. I parked and sat there a moment before going in. She was in the kitchen when I entered, startled to see me, in too smooth in her recovery. Said she'd come by to drop off some mail that had been sent to their place by mistake. The mail was on the counter, 3 pieces of it, the kind of excuse that only works if you don't look too carefully. I walked to the back of the house. The room door was intact. The lock was fine, but there were fresh scratches on the deadbolt that hadn't been there a week before. I went back to the kitchen and thanked her for dropping off the mail and offered her a glass of water for the road. She left 20 minutes later. I stood at the window and watched her pull out of the driveway and thought, it's time. I called my attorney that same afternoon. What was in the room, I should explain, was not what Renata imagined. She had constructed, in her mind, something worth the effort she was putting in. Cash, maybe. Documents she could use. A secondary will, or evidence of accounts Dion didn't know about. Something she could leverage, or take, or at the very least, photograph and consult about later. What was actually in that room was exactly what I told her the first time she asked. Storage. Boxes of Dion's childhood things. My late wife Claudette's clothes, which I haven't been able to part with and have made my peace with that fact. Tax returns going back to 2003 in manila folders. A broken treadmill I keep meaning to take to the donation center. My father's Bible with his handwriting in the margins. And 1 photos to the wall that contained the documents my attorney and I had been carefully arranging for the past 18 months. The deed to the Atlanta house, held in a trust I'd established the previous year, with Dion as sole beneficiary. Not Dion and spouse. Dion, my son, my blood alone. The revised beneficiary designations on every financial account. Done quietly, without announcement, after a long conversation with my attorney about what was prudent given the circumstances. A letter I'd written to Dion by hand, explaining all of it. Not accusatory, not angry. Just a father writing down the truth so his son would have it in his hands one day, in his own time, when he was ready to read it clearly, and a secondary document, which my attorney had prepared with some care, granting me full authority to change any arrangement at any time for any reason. Sole discretion. No contest clause written in language that took 3 drafts to get right. None of it was hidden from Dayon. I told him plainly 2 years prior, son, I've structured my estate. Everything is taken care of. If something happens to me, call Garrett, my attorney, before you do anything else. He nodded and said he trusted me. I believed him. What I hadn't told him was what I was protecting it from. On that Tuesday in Savannah, I made 2 calls. The first was to my neighbor across the street, a retired police officer named Otis, who keeps an eye on things and has my spare key for emergencies. I asked him to walk over and knock on the door and note what he observed. He called me back in 4 minutes and said a woman had answered the door and said she was my daughter-in-law dropping something off. She was calm, polite. Otis said she looked slightly flushed. My second call was to Garrett. The situation we discussed, I said. I think it's moving. How do you want to handle it? He asked. The way we planned, I said. I'll be back Thursday. I stayed in Savannah. I had dinner with my sister. I sat on that porch and listened to the night birds and let everything I put in place do the work I'd built it to do. What I didn't know sitting there was that Renata had done something I hadn't anticipated. She'd found a way into the room. Dion called me Wednesday morning, and his voice had changed. Not the frantic voice from the day before. Something slower, quieter. And that worried me more. She told me what she found, he said. What did she tell you? Long pause. She said there was a letter. She said you've been planning to cut her out since before the wedding. She said, Dad, she said you never gave her a chance. I sat with that for a moment. I was in my sister's kitchen, and my sister had the good sense to leave the room. Did she show you the letter? I asked. She read me parts of it. Did she show you the full document? Let you hold it yourself? Another pause. No, Dion, I said. I want you to do something for me. I want you to come to Atlanta Friday evening. Come to the house, bring her if you want to. I'd like you to sit down with Garrett, and I want you to read everything yourself, start to finish, with your own eyes. Can you do that? He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, She's saying you don't respect our marriage. I know she is, I said. Friday evening, can you do that? He came. She did not. Dion arrived at my house at 6 in the evening on a Friday, and he sat at my kitchen table, and Garrett spread the documents out in front of him. Everything. The trust, the letter, the beneficiary designations, the timeline of changes and why each one had been made. Garrett walked him through it with the patience of a man who has done this many times and still treats each instance with gravity. Dion read for a long time. He asked questions. Garrett answered. I sat across the table and drank my coffee and didn't try to lead him anywhere. He needed to arrive on his own. When he got to the letter, the handwritten one, he stopped reading out loud. He read it silently, and I watched his face, and I didn't rush him. When he finished, he folded it carefully along the original creases and set it down. You knew, he said. I suspected, I said. I prepared. For how long? Since before the wedding, I said. I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. I wasn't sure, and I didn't want to put something in your head that I couldn't take back. Once you say certain things to a man about his wife, you can't unsay them. I needed to be patient. Dion looked at the table for a while. The scratches on the lock, he said. I saw them too last month. She said it must have been from you. I haven't touched that lock in 6 months. He nodded slowly. She read me parts of the letter, he said. Not the parts about why. Just the parts about the accounts. The parts that sounded like you were taking something away from her. She didn't read me the part where you explained that everything was being protected for me. I know, I said. She framed it. She tried to. He put his hand over his face and sat like that for a minute. I didn't fill the silence. Some silences are doing important work and you shouldn't interrupt them. When he dropped his hand, his eyes were red. Not crying. He's his mother's son in that way, holds things in, but close. What do I do now? He said. That's not a question I can answer for you, I said. I've done everything I can do on my end. The rest is yours. He came over the following Sunday and helped me finally move that broken treadmill to the truck. We didn't talk much, the way men sometimes don't talk when they're working through something large and quiet inside. We ate lunch together after. He stayed until evening. He told me 3 weeks later that he'd asked Renata to move out. He didn't ask me if that was the right decision. He made it on his own, and I respected that more than I can say. There's something I want to put clearly, because I've thought about it in the months since. I didn't set a trap. A trap is something you build to catch someone who hasn't shown you who they are yet. What I built was a record, documentation of who I was, what I had, what I intended, and why, so that my son could read it with his own eyes one day and know the truth, even if someone else had tried to write a different version of it for him. That's not a trap. That's a father doing the slow, quiet work that nobody sees until the moment it matters. My father kept a notebook in his bedside drawer. Nothing valuable in it. Phone numbers, reminders, a few Bible verses he'd written out by hand. But he also kept a running account of the family's finances, honest and plain, so that when he died, my mother would know exactly where everything stood, and no one could tell her otherwise. He never talked about that notebook. I only found it after he was gone. I've tried to live by that example. Write things down. Keep your own record. Don't rely on other people's accounts of your life. Dion is doing well now. He started seeing someone, a woman who teaches high school history, quiet and plain-spoken and careful with her words. And the first time I met her, she asked me about the trucking business, not because she looked anything up, but because Dayon had told her, and she was genuinely curious about how it worked. I liked that. I liked her asking about the work, not the outcome of the work. He seems lighter these days. Or maybe I'm just seeing him more clearly. Last month he came by on a Sunday and we cooked together. My mother's recipe for short ribs, the one that takes all day and is absolutely worth every hour of it. At some point in the afternoon, while we were waiting on the second low and slow stretch, he said, without looking up from the pot, "I think I knew something was wrong. For a while. I just didn't want to know it, if that makes sense." "It makes perfect sense," I said. I kept thinking, she'll settle in. People need time to settle into a new family. "Sometimes they do," I said. "And sometimes they don't. And sometimes they don't." And agreed. We ate those short ribs at the kitchen table, the same table where he'd sat across from Garrett with those documents spread in front of him, and it was one of the best meals I've had in years. The light coming through the window was that late afternoon gold. Claudette would have loved it. She always said the best meals were the ones with nothing particular to celebrate except the fact of being at the table together. She was right about that. She was right about most things. I'm 67 years old. I've buried a wife and a business partner and my father. I've made a great deal of money, and I've lost some, and I've learned that neither the making nor the losing is the point. The point is what you build that lasts, not the accounts, not the house, not the investments. Those are instruments. They're not the thing itself. My son came back to the table. That's the thing itself. Everything else was just the work I did to make sure the table was still there when he was ready to sit down. That's the only inheritance that ever mattered. There's a moment I keep coming back to. I'm sitting on my sister's porch in Savannah, ceiling fan turning slow overhead, and my son is on the phone telling me his wife is inside my house. And I'm not panicking. I'm not even angry. I'm just thinking, this is the moment I built everything for. That's not something that happens by accident. That kind of steadiness takes years to grow. What I've learned, and I didn't learn it easily, is that the people who end up with nothing to protect them aren't usually the ones who lacked resources. They're the ones who lack the patience to build carefully, quietly, and without an audience. Renata moved fast. She asked questions with a smile. She circled back through different doors. She was smart in a way that relied entirely on other people being careless. And for a long time, I think she believed I was. I wasn't careless. I was watching. There's a kind of wisdom that doesn't look like wisdom from the outside. It looks like stubbornness. It looks like an old man being difficult about a room in his own house. It looks like a father who won't let his guard down at Sunday dinner. But what it actually is a man who has been paying attention long enough to know what he's seeing, even when the people around him aren't ready to see it yet. That's the part I want to sit with for a moment. Because Dayon isn't a foolish man. He's my son. I raised him. He knew something was wrong. He said so himself, standing over that pot of short ribs. I think I knew for a while. I just didn't want to know it. That's one of the most honest things a person can say. And it took real strength to say it. The courage to look clearly at something painful. That's not a small thing. I've watched grown men spend entire decades refusing to do it. Dayon sat at that table, read every document, asked every hard question, and then made his own decision. I didn't push him. I didn't have to. That's what I'd been trying to build in him since he was small. Not a man who needed me to tell him what to do, but a man who could read a situation and trust his own judgment. Renata could pick a lock. She couldn't pick that. And here's the thing about cause and effect that nobody wants to talk about plainly. The way you move through the world has consequences, not mystical consequences, practical ones. When you treat a marriage as a transaction, when you spend 2 years mapping someone's assets instead of learning who they are, when you read a man's private letter to his son and then perform a selective reading of it to cause maximum damage, you are building something. You're building a situation, and eventually you have to live in what you build. Renata walked into that house believing she was about to change her position. She left having revealed hers. What Dayon and I have now? Those Sunday dinners, the short ribs that take all day, the comfortable silences of two people who've been through something real together. That's not luck. That's what you get when you stay honest with each other even when it's hard, when you do the unglamorous work of protecting what matters, and when you choose, in the end, to sit back down at the table. I'm 67 years old. I plan to keep cooking,